Good afternoon, everyone. There we go. This is not school. I'm not teacher, but welcome, everyone. Charles, maybe introduce yourself.
I'm Charles Nell. I'm the head of technical at the Institute of Internal Auditors, and we've had a fun last year as far as governance goes in professional bodies. So governance matters more than you think, I think, because if we look at even professions are under governance pressure, and that's how we deal with those issues at all levels of society that count.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zaf Mahomed. I'm the CFO of McDonalds South Africa. For me, governance is more than just what you think it is, and that's why I'm here to talk to you. But I think there's been a lot more focus now on risk and how you manage your risk, and I think governance is one of those elements that hopefully can help you manage your risk. So that's what we're here to talk about today. I want to make sure that this is interactive. So I'd love for you to give us your experience on governance, on risk, on compliance matters, and ask us the tough questions. Don't be afraid. So we want this to be participatory, okay? Not us lecturing to you. So if we can do that, then we're good. Yeah, Charles?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go. So, yeah.
No, go first, I mean.
So if we look at governance in the broadest perspective in South Africa, it runs from the tone at the top on South Africa Incorporated and runs all the way down to the McDonald's shop that's down at the corner there, giving us some coffee for free.
Well, what's that about? There's no such thing as a free lunch. Trust me, we count the coffee. But yeah, you're right. It's probably, it starts and ends with Greg Solomon, our CEO. Governance doesn't rest with me as the CFO. It actually rests with the board and with Greg Solomon. And he's the guy that takes it very, very seriously. And you're right. If it's not the tone from the top, then you don't have governance. Then what you have is, some kind of semblance of order. But if you don't have it at the top, you don't have it at all. And again, to your point, at a restaurant level, between cashing up at a cashier level, to counting stock, to receiving stock, to counting the patties and the buns and the straws and the serviettes, governance is everywhere in our business, and you can't get away from it. I think the one difference, though, is that we don't see it as separate to our business. We see it as an integral part of our business. So we don't see governance as a subject on its own. It sits in every single sphere of our business. And we're very, very proud of that because it's what makes us who we are. So whether you're counting patties or you're counting customers or counting your sales, all of that includes an element of governance. So we prefer to not think of it as a separate part of our business. We see it as part and parcel of what we do as a business.
That's right. And you introduced risk right at the start. And a very effective form of governance is when every single employee of the organization is a risk manager of their risk in the business, because they must understand the risk that they bring to the business. And once they understand that, you're able to say, how do I govern the risk, or how do I control the risk? And that control is the governance processes starting at the bottom level. So until we get to a stage where every employee understands the risk that they're dealing with in an organization, governance is an issue at all levels. Governance at the top levels is an issue because I can be responsible for the finances of the organization. That's his job. Whether he gets fired when he didn't do it properly, there is accountable. And I think South Africa in general has lacked a significant amount of accountability at all levels, state and private sector, and that's why we're reaping the benefits of it right now. So the fact that we have a lot of unemployment now is not just the lack of governance resulting in corruption at the state level, but it's lack of governance at organizational level in the private sector that have resulted in the situation we're currently in South Africa, despite world economic conditions.
So even in our business, and I can talk from a McDonald's perspective, risk is everywhere. I spoke at a conference in Dubai 2 weeks ago. And what's coming out with the world now is less of a focus on governance and more of a focus on where risk is going to come from next. So a lot of that was about technological risk and risk to jobs. At an earlier session, we were talking about evolution and what's going to evolve in the finance space. And those kind of risks, you don't see them coming. You think of risk and you think of governance as only being somebody stealing money or stock or debtors not paying you and there's a bribe or something like that. It's actually much bigger than that. And, compliance is used very loosely around the world. But the reality is, how do you comply with technological risk? What do you put in place? It's not something that you see. It's not the startup company that pops up and starts getting a banking license and starts to disrupt, the world. So for me, it's a lot more about risk management and identifying where your risk is in the business. Because the governance of that can only happen once you've identified the risk. And I don't know if you share that view.
I'm very inclined to agree with you. So your governance, you will only manage or govern what you're aware of. And what you're unaware of, you won't govern. We can look at a couple of examples in the recent news. So we're looking at Uber, for instance. Young, dynamic startup, governance problems. We're looking at ex-South African, making motor vehicles with electric batteries in them or batteries in them.
I think he's smoking his socks.
Yeah. He's in the States. But also paid a huge fine to the SEC just the other day.
And he's chairman and CEO.
That's common practice in the States, by the way.
I don't get how they can have the chairman and the CEO as one person.
Well, that's one of the issues. So that independence is not there, and therefore, and that's part of the governance structure, obviously.
But I suppose then you've got to ask the question: when governance at that level is not apparent and there's no independence, you see the real impact on their share price, because their share price tanked after that little incident, if you like.
That's exactly, and that's why governance matters more than you think, because we've had a couple of examples in South Africa in the last year, and we've had instances where it was handled correctly and where it was handled incorrectly, and whether the.
Do you have examples that we can share?
Well, let's think about Steinhoff. Is it really as bad as it seems? Or was it because there was external influence trying to drop the share price? I can't answer that question.
Okay.
But there was interference, and it was tried against one of the banks, and they reacted in a different manner, and it was stopped. And now there's investigations going on in that space. But the issue of governance runs across the board and across organizations. It has no boundaries anymore. Let's put it that way. So an impact of governance in Austria is going to have an impact on organizations in South Africa. So despite us saying technology covers the aspects of the world and covers the whole world and is changing the world, governance is in exactly the same space. It acts in different spaces in different countries and is interpreted differently.
So if we just take the Steinhoff example, I read that the Frankfurt Stock Exchange has a lot more distressed companies than the JSE. And Steinhoff did not submit their financials. It was their primary listing, and no red flags were raised because it was the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, which isn't as diligent, which shocked me. I mean, to hear that an international stock exchange is not as diligent as the JSE. And that was missed. And because they hadn't published their financials, red flags should have been raised everywhere. And because it was a primary listing as opposed to a secondary listing, that made all the difference.
Big difference, yeah.
So what is the importance of red flags in your view?
I think red flags are quite critical. But unfortunately, the red flags have changed. So whereas you could focus inwardly on the organization and consider a couple of external risks, what is the governance game changer at the moment? For me, it's the fact that we were talking about it yesterday, in fact, and I'm trying to think of the word. It's an IT word. That a platform can change an industry. So an IT platform can change an industry. And we can take South African examples. Uber in South Africa is changing the industry. How many use Uber? When it's convenient, plenty.
Don't be shy to use Uber. It's okay. We won't judge.
What I'm saying is it's changed, the platform has changed the industry. And it's caused concern for those organizations which haven't kept to date with technology. And that's the case in many, many industries. So I don't know how we're going to change McDonald's to get, what platform we're going to put in place.
You're going to sell more burgers.
To sell more burgers and get them, but you deliver burgers to home. So all I'm saying is that the type of risk that we're dealing with is so significantly changed that sometimes your governance can't keep up with the change in the industry, because it's not just a stage change that you can plan for. Sometimes it just jumps 5 years ahead of where you are, and then you've got to try and adapt very quickly in your organization. So that's disruption
in governance.
That's disruption. It's disruption, and disruption changes the governance structures. So there are a number of issues that you're dealing with constantly in organizations, and compliance. You might find it very strange that I would say this, but compliance is not necessarily the top end of the listing for me. Ethical behavior is probably the top end.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think ethical behavior is far more important than compliance.
Yeah.
Because you can comply on a tick box. Take BE for example.
Yeah.
To get a scorecard, it's very easy to tick a box. But if you want to do the right thing, which is transform the country, then you don't look at a scorecard. And I think, that's very topical today. Is we see that all over the place, and it's ethical behavior not only in government, it's ethical behavior in big corporates, and how you do what's right. And part of that is company culture. So I can talk about McDonald's because company culture is part of what we do. We think like entrepreneurs, but ethical behavior and culture is important to us, and we act really quickly when we see behavior that's not appropriate. And if you have that in an organization, I think that strengthens your compliance far more than any scorecard or any audit or any of that. And if you at the top don't see that, then you're not in touch with the organization.
Well, sometimes they don't want to see it at the top of the organization. So,
well, I suppose there's also this thing of pressure on performance. When your shareholders, and I'm not talking about McDonald's, I'm talking about previous companies that I've been involved in, but where you've got shareholders and fellow executives that are pushing a bonus or pushing an agenda of results, then there is pressure in the system. And when that pressure is there, then ethical behavior, you
under pressure.
It is under pressure.
Yeah.
So I think you're quite right that it's more about ethical behavior than it is about compliance. But ethical behavior starts with self. It doesn't start with an organization. And where you see ethical behavior where it's not appropriate, then you should, stand up for it or exit the system if it's bad.
That's right. So what are we actually saying about governance? If you look at the big picture or the philosophical picture, governance, you can put all the structures in place, you can have all the legislation in place, but if you don't apply the principles correctly, governance goes out the window. So it's really up to the individual in the organization. And if you see governance going wrong, no matter whether you the most junior person in the organization or the one who joined yesterday, it's taking that discussion to somebody else and actually making people aware. Because very often we're finding that people are not aware that they have ethical issues and that those issues have a governance impact at some stage. So sometimes you're not aware that it's happening.
So I'll ask you a question about charismatic leaders. Because that's what we had with Steinhoff. And it's no coincidence, and I won't talk about Tesla because I don't know about their governance issues, but charismatic leadership, there is a risk there that you get caught up in this, I don't know what's the right word, but you get caught up in the person as opposed to, and particularly if you're a finance professional, your first responsibility is to the assets of the company, not to your CEO. And where you have CEOs that are charismatic, it's a problem. What's your view on that?
That's a difficult one to answer.
Okay, let's ask somebody in the audience.
No, yeah.
I'm just kidding.
No, it's not about, it's about that constant friction. And I was speaking to a group of people the other day at an organization, to the executive of one of the state organizations. And if I look at it from an internal audit point of view, I said to them, if there's not friction between yourselves and management all the time, then you're not doing your job properly. And management don't understand you. Because management need to know that internal auditor there to question their governance behavior and to test them and to push their boundaries and to say, you're not aware of this, you're not reacting to this change in the outside environment. Are you aware of it? Are you dealing with it, or are you carrying on as you were previously? Here's a breakdown in control. Your governance structures are not working in the space. You might be happy with what's happening, but we're not happy. And that constant tension and change, requirement for change and keeping up needs to be there in the organization. I've also often said that if your CEO hasn't sworn you as the head of audit twice in your lifetime, then you haven't done your job properly.
Well, I've had a few CEOs swear me as a CFO. Because,
so
obviously, you're going to disagree. And sometimes you disagree on matters of principle. Sometimes it's matters of strategy. And you've got to know the difference. When it's a matter of principle, it's not negotiable. When it's a matter of strategy, then it's a robust discussion around what is the right strategy. And you can't sit there as a CFO, and I'm talking from my own perspective, and say no all the time. You know what they call us Dr. No? You know, the thing is, a CEO is a particular type of animal. And I don't use the word animal in a derogatory way, not intended. But, you know, the CEO is given a mandate to be visionary, to hold, to give belief to the system, and come up with 10 ideas of which one will succeed. It's not your job to tell them why it won't succeed. It's your job to say, how do I make this work? And if it's not going to work, these are the reasons why, but have you tried something different? And as finance people, we hold that in an operational perspective, you know, we hold that position, and we should hold it not as a automatic no, you can't make this work, or the ROIs are bad, or you actually got to sit and listen and understand it, unpack it, do the due diligence, and then come up with a cohesive argument, as opposed to keep saying no all the time. And I'm talking at a practical level, which you guys can take away today and say, well, this is how I do it in my job. And I've done this for a long time. I think about the Ellerine story, and I was the CFO of Ellerines, and I was speaking earlier about it. And that wasn't a failure of governance. That was a failure of business model. But African Bank, that was a failure of governance, because they weren't able to provision correctly. It was easy to blame Ellerines as the problem, because that was then a scapegoat. And yes, the business model for Ellerines didn't work. But I can tell you that for the 2 years that I was there, at every audit and risk meeting, and we had both. We had an internal audit meeting, or an audit committee meeting, and a risk committee, because they were a bank. I stood up and shouted from the rooftops that there was significant risk in our business, and that the impact was considerable. And it was minuted. And when the Myburg Commission came to look at the demise of African Bank, they never asked Ellerines a single question. I was not even interviewed, because it was all in the audit committee packs and the risk committee packs. And why that's important is because it's not because I didn't want to be questioned by the Myburg Commission, but it was because I was doing my job. And that's the important piece. And you do your best to protect the assets of the company. And I'll give you another example, and I'd love to hear your views on this, is when you sit at Exco, if you sit there in your functional capacity, you're doing the wrong thing. And let me tell you why. Because for those of you that understand the Companies Act really well, you understand your fiduciary duty extends to beyond your functional role. And there are some companies that have an empty chair in their boardroom, so that when you are in a meeting and somebody says, Zaf, what is the EBITDA for the company? I get up from my seat, go sit in the functional seat, answer the question as a CFO, and then go back to my job as being a director of the company. And why that's important is you've got to understand your role from a statutory perspective, that you're a director of the company. Because too often you hear, in a lot of these governance failures, it was the finance guy. I was just the marketing guy. I just sat there and, you see this in state-owned enterprises because it's public. You don't see this so much in corporates because they get paid to go away. It's true. It's true. You get a municipal manager who steals 1,000 rand. It's all over. People phone into 702. Okay? But a CEO or a CFO can steal 1 million rand and they get paid quietly to go away. Okay? Because it's brand risk or whatever the case may be. But if you don't understand that your role is as a director of the company, and whether it's marketing or HR or finance, you have a role to play. When it's a functional thing, then you deal with that. I don't know if you've come across this in...
Yeah, I think very often the executive and the leadership, let's not say executive, let's say the leadership. The leadership deems the assets of the companies as theirs to utilize as they like. And the one thing that you need to understand as a leader is that what is your role? Your role is to make sure that you provide for not just the shareholders of the organization a return, but that you provide for the stakeholders. The stakeholders include employees. And if you would fire an employee for stealing a Coke, as an executive of the organization, what gives you the right to go and take a Coke out of a container at one of your stores and drink it? Because in that space, that leader is utilizing company assets for a purpose that he shouldn't. He's a thief, full stop, because he doesn't have the right to do that. He has to protect the assets of the organization, and he holds those assets in trust. He's the person who's the trust, and that's why governance is there. Governance is about maintaining the trust of the public and the individuals in the world.
So, I'm scared of you now, because I pay for my own McDonald's.
Depends if it's in your package.
No, it's actually not fair. We visit McDonald's all the time. We spend a lot of time in the organization visiting our stores. We sit, in a particular role, and they love to see us in the business. And we visit stores all the time. And I visit stores with Greg. We visit stores with our shareholders. And we always pay for our own McDonald's. That's an important principle because, when it's charged to a promo account, for example, that affects the business. It affects people's livelihoods, because the incentives and so on are based on it. And it's small, but it also sets a tone from the top. And that's important. And there's no better person than Greg, our CEO. He is probably the most honest person I've ever met. And that goes throughout the company. And it's when you talk about honesty, it's not only about paying for the Coke that you take out of the fridge. And Coke's a good partner of ours, by the way. But it's also about how you treat employees. Honesty is about treating them with respect. And you'll find that, I walked into Polokwane McDonald's, and the reception we got was out of this world. And Greg did a very naughty thing. He pretended I was the CEO, and he pushed me in front. I didn't know what was going on. I was oblivious. And he made me walk in front. And I got this ululation. What is it? And ladies singing and men singing. And they had a praise singer. And I was, wow, this is just something else. And when you see that kind of reception in a business, it talks to the culture. And we see that a lot of the different parts of South Africa that we visit. But it starts with the top, and it goes all the way down to every single employee. And yeah, you're going to get bad apples, and we're very, very much about holding people accountable. But holding people accountable starts with holding self accountable. And if you don't do that, then you can't hold employees accountable, to your point.
That's quite right. So, can I ask you this question?
Yeah.
How many of you broke the speed limit driving here today? Okay.
I Ubered. Somebody else broke the speed limit. Why do you ask, Charles?
Because that's holding yourself accountable. So, if I drive through a red robot and nobody gets injured, that's fine. Governance. Principles of governance. I'm breaking the law. If it's 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm driving home from a late meeting and the robot is red, do I slow down, stop, make sure everything's clear and go?
You know, you're talking about South Africa here.
I am talking about South Africa. I'm talking about South Africa. But all I'm trying to do is just take the governance principle and bring it back to how do I govern myself? Because if I don't govern myself correctly, I'm going to not take the greater good into the account. Governance is about the greater good.
It's also about awareness, yeah?
Yeah, awareness.
You've got to be aware of what's happening around you.
Yeah. It's about being aware of the greater good.
The greater good is having McDonald's every day.
Yeah, that's marketing.
Oh, we have a question.
Okay, the question is for Charles. You mentioned earlier about every person in a business having to be a risk manager. So I agree with you on that. But a statement, no question. When you are that person, you become seen as the tattletale, you become seen as the doomsayer because you're always warning people of the risks that are coming. What role do you think do whistleblower lines play? Should they play a bigger role? Is it a negative connotation to managing governance? That's one thing. And then as it relates to the risk of governance, I understand the monetary risk and the corruption, but what about credibility and how do you build it back in those bodies? So if you look at the FBI recently, anyone that is a credible body who is then found not to be credible, how do you build credibility in the governance institutions you have? So whistleblowing in the role, and again, how do you build back the credibility in what should be the governance of a body?
So if we're looking at whistleblowing, and you took a little bit of a different tack than I was looking at. So I'm saying, if I look at Charles knows how to manage the risks that he has to deal with. So you've had that open discussion. That's a little bit different from looking at reporting on somebody else not doing their, or you've seen a gap in controls, which is a different sort of mechanism. Whistleblowing depends on how it's dealt with. If we look at the world and culture in the world is not kind to whistleblowers, and I don't understand why. Because if you're a whistleblower, how many whistleblowers have retained their jobs? Very few.
If any.
If any.
But it starts at
That's the big
school.
ones.
You speak to your kids.
Yeah.
If they tell on a fellow student, they get taken out. So that talks to the point the gentleman made.
Brings us back to ethics and culture.
And that's how we grow up in South Africa, not to tell on other people. It's ingrained from school level.
And also the culture is soft, so the culture allows to make mistakes. Now, I do believe that you need to allow to make mistakes. It's how you handle the governance around making a mistake. So if somebody's stolen something once, do you fire them to get the message in? Or do they have to go through some sort of rehab program within your organization to see if there's corrective behavior, and then you monitor? So it really depends on how you want to approach the governance structure within an organization at a very philosophical level.
Yeah, because firing somebody for stealing 20 Rand compared to firing somebody who steals at 2 million Rand, at what stage does materiality
start to play a role in the seriousness of what is happening? Was it done with a gun held to somebody's head, or was it
opportunistic?
I needed to buy bread for my kid because I didn't have enough money, because the petrol price is now 17 Rand something. So you've got to always bring, and for me, governance is bring it into context, always into context. But as an individual citizen, you need to actually go out and look out there and say, the impact of what I'm doing, is it for my self-enrichment? Or am I during the self-enrichment making a good contribution towards society? And am I uplifting the society as a whole? And I think that's where we've lost the plot a little bit. Ubuntu is a term which I didn't know, being a white South African. It's a term which I've generally, my whole life, tried to live in that space. and we don't always get it right, each of us. And that's why I'm in the career I'm in at the moment, is because I believe that we need to change the way people think about things, and I believe that we need to uplift our society and those who didn't get an opportunity many years ago. So, governance, consider the other person, and maybe you won't do it. The point I wanted to bring out about driving through a red robot. Would I do something if somebody was watching me? And then if nobody is watching me, would I do the same thing? So would I drive through a red robot in the middle of the day? No, because people can watch me. Would I drive through it at 2 o'clock in the morning at high speed? No, because I care about other people and nobody's watching me. So whether I get away with it or not is not the issue. It's whether I apply the discipline in my own life to be able to do things in a way which considers others.
So you said something that resonates with me, this thing of giving people a second chance. If I look at my life and the mistakes I've made, and I've made lots of mistakes, as I'm sure all of you have, unless you're perfect, which is... But, you know, you always want somebody to give you a second chance, and it depends on the mistake that you make and the intention when you made that mistake. You know, if you've done something because you're taking a risk and you want to make something happen, and you make a mistake, the best bosses are the ones that says, I recognize that you made the effort and you did something. Yes, you failed, and yes, it was a mistake. But, you know, governance is more than just catching somebody. It's also about what have you learned from it. And if there's no, it's not about repentance. It's not about trying to say, hey, listen, you know, this cost the company so much. It's also about learning. And the learning process is very, very important. You know, at McDonald's, for example, Greg, our CEO, he loves giving people a second chance, a third chance. And it's amazing to see him have that level of empathy. And why that's important is not because, you know, people will think, hey, we can take a chance here because we got a soft boss. It's not that at all. It's amazing how much you can get out of people when you treat them with respect. And that applies to everybody. You know, you just want to be treated with respect. You just want somebody to give you an ear so that you can explain yourself. And after that, you're given a second chance. You do it the second time, you might get a third chance. But after a while, you develop a pattern. And then it's pretty easy to see what you really are about. And that's really the thing that resonates with me, is this thing of giving people a second chance, because we all make mistakes.
That's true. And I'll keep on coming back to that's why governance counts more than you think. Because it impacts on other people. And the way you apply it, and apply control in your organization, impacts on other people. How you apply compliance impacts on other people. So are you going to go rule-based or principle-based? Use your own mind. Because in certain situations, the rule is not going to work. Sometimes you need to apply the principle. And once you've got an understanding of the principles surrounding governance, and if we look at King 4, the first two principles relate to ethics, because if ethics is right, the rest sort of starts
much easier,
filter into place. And that's why ethics is a key. We've had a couple of discussions at the office lately about conflict of interest. And what's popping up is sometimes you don't realize you've got a conflict of interest. And we're busy working on a paper looking at conflict of interest and seeing how we can articulate it. Because it's not as simple as when we started discussing it as a group. It's not as simple as we thought it was. And we realized suddenly that in certain areas we've got conflicts of interest, even as a professional body. And I'll give you an example where we could have one. The Institute of Internal Auditors it's a non-regulated body, so it's a members-only body. But we've created a professional pathway under the QCTO, and one of the requirements there is, because we set the syllabus and we set the final examination. So can I do the training?
And do you get paid for doing the training?
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's an important piece. If you're getting paid to do something, then...
All right, but I set the syllabus and I also set the final exam. So what we've had to do at the Institute is actually create another organization which can...
So even though you're not for profit, you still have a conflict.
Yeah, that's right.
Interesting. I never thought of that.
It's for members, yeah. And the conference is a different leg. So that, for instance, is going to stay at the Institute because it's not competitive in the market. But for the professionals running through the program, to remain competitive, the people providing the training need to be accredited. The Institute does the accreditation because we're the accreditation body. So can we do the training? No, we can't. So a separate body has been created.
But this was okay 5 years ago.
We knew it was coming. So we've already done the work. And that's what I said about
Didn't see that
foresight.
coming. Didn't see that coming.
Yeah, you didn't see that one coming. No, we saw it coming and we knew we were going to hit our heads. So we've actually created that. And that body will compete with anybody else who wants to provide the training in the market. So
amazing. Didn't know conflict existed with it.
So, but what I'm saying is that conflict is at organizational level. It's not at CEO level. It's about governing the organization. So not at individual. We've been speaking about individual. I just try to change the picture and say governance matters at levels which are not just within the organization, but at levels
even in
across
an industry
organization level. And across industries. Well, we've seen examples of where it didn't work too well in the building industry. Yep. And we've seen layoffs now. So despite the state of the economy, possible consequences of a result of a lack of governance a couple of years ago.
So I think it's time to take some questions. We've got 7 or 8 minutes left. Questions?
Thank you very much. In some organizations... thank you. In some organizations, governance and management, there's a very thin line. Maybe you can explain to us a little bit more.
Okay.
How it should be handled.
Governance for me is about the concept and the principle of, I would say, manage an organization in an effective manner, in a manner which is acceptable to society. All right, and having the checks and balances in place to make sure that the delegations of authorities are properly handled by those in authority.
And the controls are in place.
Yeah, and the controls are working. So we very often look at governance, and you're talking for governance. Who are you talking to? You're talking to the board or the governing body.
Or the audit committee.
Or the audit committee, the people who could be held accountable. So that has to devolve right down to the individual. So managing is part of governance. Execution of management effectively is part of governance. And how it rolls up to the higher levels within big organizations is part of governance. And then how that control is exercised down is part of governance. So governance is a concept.
And as I said earlier, it's integral in everything that you do. You don't ever take it out and say, this is the governance piece. It's in everything that we do. Whether it's temperature of the fridge, that's governance. Because if that food goes off, it's going to affect our customer. So governance is more than just financial control. It's all the controls in your business. And if it's your DNA, then you'll do it really well. And I think you find that those companies that aren't able to manage that well end up in trouble because they don't see it as part and parcel of what they do. They see it as a separate element, as a separate function. The head of internal audit, that's his problem. And where you have that, you tend to have problems.
Yeah, so it is an integral part. And I think it's an integral part of every person within the organization. That's why I went right down to
self, yeah.
Yeah, yourself. Because that's what's got to be pushed through the organization. We don't do it. We say, this is the way you must do this job. All right. How about having the discussion about why do you think you should do this job like this? And get an understanding of why it needs to be governed in the way it's being governed. And perhaps you'll find out there are better ways of doing things.
Question at the back.
Hi guys. Speaking on or having a look at governance, like the current issues that we've seen as a country, we've got KPMG, the saga there, Steinhoff, corporate failure, state capture, let's not even talk government and all that stuff. But as a society, we're talking governance being a thing of culture, a thing of something that goes into the fabric of who we are as a people. Is there enough consequence for all these actions that are happening? So we're seeing it splashed on the media, but what is the repercussions? What is the consequence where as society we go, okay, are we happy? Have we really changed? Can we move forward?
So if I may, just on the KPMG one, look at what's happened to KPMG today. So there is real consequence. People have lost their jobs. They're not renewing audits with KPMG. And I was talking to one of the partners at our auditing firm, EY, and even the guy at Deloitte, who we do some work with. And we were having a discussion, and I said, this is a big issue, because do you now go and poach people from KPMG? Is that the ethical thing to do? And without even thinking about it, they said, absolutely not. We will not go and poach people, because that's not the right thing for the country. It's not the right thing for the profession. And that filled me with a lot of pride, because you automatically think, hey, if this was the US, can you imagine, in a capitalistic society? But I still think we have a bit of gees in this country, that we still do the right things, and that when you see your competitor down, you don't go for the jugular. And I think that's what the other audit firms have done, is they haven't allowed themselves to take advantage of the KPMG situation. So I think there is real consequence, firstly, but it's also how you react to that consequence that's important.
And it's again about the governance structure. So who was aware, and if we go back many years to Arthur Andersen, who caused the collapse of that global organization? One partner. How many partners have we got at KPMG?
In excess of 200, probably.
How many were involved in the issue? As far as I'm aware. Might be another one, but one as far as I'm aware. So, do you paint everybody with the same brush? And do you react to the market in the same way? And I'm not standing for or against KPMG. But why governance matters is, have we gone as KPMG, and the question I would ask is, have we gone and looked at the way we structure in the partners packages to see if it promotes that sort of behavior, or does it promote behavior which is ethical? I can't comment on that because I don't see into the organization. But that's the question I would ask. Is how your key performance indicators structured that you would try and hold an account to keep your job, rather than actually turning around and saying, there's something wrong here, I'm not going to touch you.
I actually want to talk a little bit about the Steinhoff issue, and whether the skill set of the people doing the auditing was good enough to pick up what was going on in Steinhoff. Because there's one thing to say, hey, a company is dishonest, but it's quite another when the regulatory body or the auditing body or the company doing the audit is not suitably qualified to pick up what was obviously a fraud. Because that's what happened in Steinhoff. They took all the bad stuff into separate companies offshore. And whether it was Estina Dairy or any of the other things that you look at, if they had done their job and if they had the proper skills as auditors, they would have picked these things up. I did auditing many, many years ago, too many years ago. But even there, you had to know what you were doing. I question the skills level of the people doing auditing, because there's just too many of these, not only in South Africa, around the world, where you can't pick up these things anymore. And you got to ask the questions.
But I think the key issue is Steinhoff are not South African. So that's the first issue. So Did we have the governance structures in place that we could put the picture together as the leadership of the organization to be able to say this was happening?
And there was massive collusion.
And there was massive collusion somewhere.
So even your controls are not going to work in this situation.
Controls are not going to work. So why didn't you? The question is, how do you get that big picture that's outside the space that you're working in? Because it's impossible if you're running a big group to know, a diversified group like that, to know that everything that's happening in every organization. Can your internal audit play a role there? Yes, they can. Is it applied in the same manner in all the countries? No, it's not. Was there one person within that organization who knew what was going on in every single organization subsidiary? No.
Thank you very much, sir. The issue of KPMG, as it stands now, will it fade away, or what advice can we give? If you were to give KPMG advice, what should be the advice?
Okay, so
You want me to take this one?
no, I'll take it. It's not my profession, so I can talk.
It's not mine either.
I wouldn't comment on the organization and say how to take it. All right? So should you move your business away from them or not? How many organizations that they've supported and taken audits, done audit work on, are still running effectively today?
Probably most.
Most of them? How many audit failures have they had within their organization, within South Africa and globally? We know of the Gupta one and its subsidiaries, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. How many honest people do we have in South Africa? That laugh makes me nervous. You think the most of South Africans are honest? I think so. I think so. I think the most of South Africans just want to have a job and go to work and
Catch a
take care.
pickpocket in the township, see what happens to them.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, drive 160 or 190 on the M1 and be the chief executive of Pick and Pay, and you're no longer the chief executive on the Monday morning. Okay, that's governance. That's governance. Immediate accountability by the organization because of reputational risk.
Correct.
So, if we look at KPMG, I'll ask you the question: how many of the partners do you think are honest? I sit in the audit committee forum of South Africa.
Most of them.
And I deal with ex-KPMG partners, and they all straight down the line. Ernst & Young partners, straight down the line. PwC partners, straight down the line.
No, I work with them on a daily basis. I know these are honest people.
They are honest. They love their profession. So do you want to destroy an organization? And it's something we need to start thinking about. Do you want to destroy an organization which has a lot of honest people in it who want to do their jobs properly because one person failed? And you have a knee-jerk reaction to it. And South Africa is very good at knee-jerk reactions.
And phoning 702. We had a question. Do you just want to shout really loudly?
On the issue of audits, scandals that we said, I've asked myself a few questions, and I've compared companies, the big four. I don't know how many big one or two or three are left. So I've asked myself whether the audit quality has improved, remained the same, deteriorated. And I've also compared the quality of audit in the public sector, the Auditor General. I've seen instances where an audit is outsourced to a private company, PwC or Deloitte. So that company would audit, clean audit. The Auditor General takes over. It's a disclaimer. So then I ask myself, to what extent, what pressures do auditing firms have on fees that ends up ending up in the deterioration of the audit quality? If you're familiar with the Auditor General, they're on your premises for 9 months. So all public entities may as well charge the Auditor General rentals because they're always there.
So I can.
How long does a listed company, or how long does an audit take? But also, a different point, I've asked myself whether one should be relying on an audit report. If I look at banking as an example, so it has to be 2 auditing firms. And if the shareholders are not happy with one of the auditing firms, the Reserve Bank says you can't fire them. So if you can't be fired, then you are no longer independent. You can do whatever you like. You are there's no accountability. So my question is, what are the prospects that a bank can get an audit finding, a significant audit finding that lands up on the audit report? Nothing. So is ERBA doing its job? I'm not sure. So if ERBA was effective, we wouldn't be asking these questions. So yeah. Thanks.
So I just want to respond to a few things because I think your comments are excellent. The first one is that, compared to 20, 25 years ago and the quality of audit clerks coming through the system, I would say the skills level has dropped. When I get people asking me the questions about our business, I often ask myself, do these people truly understand auditing? And that scares me. Because I not only see that in the auditing profession, I also see that in the people I'm recruiting, first-time jobs in finance. The skills level in South Africa is poor, and we have to do something about it. I don't think that the universities are producing enough good quality people, and we're dropping standards. We're dropping standards in matric, we're dropping standards at university level. And that's not the country I grew up in. And that shouldn't be how it is. So skills is a really big issue. That's the first thing I want to say. The second one is whether a company should be paying for the audit. For me, the shareholders should pay for the audit. It shouldn't be a company expense. And you should be able to fire auditors. And this thing of audit rotation is a good one. I think it's important because when you get new auditors with a fresh set of eyes, they'll see things differently. It started with partner rotation. There was a lot of pushback on that, and I'm glad it went through. And audit rotation is another one that's coming, which I think is important, and I think will help. But can we rely on an audit report? I think it's 2 parts to that. I think it has definitely a place, but you cannot get away from management being responsible. Now you're putting all the onus on auditors. That's not okay. The auditors are there to check. But how can you check when you have collusion like you did in Steinhoff? Not that I'm trying to protect the auditors of Steinhoff, but somebody willfully colluded and did something dishonest. And no amount of auditors is going to catch that. Yes, you can ask questions and red flags and so on, but that's management. You must hold management accountable. Same with state-owned enterprises. You're putting a lot of pressure on the Auditor General. What about dealing with the dishonesty in the state-owned enterprise and holding those people accountable? And it's only now that we're hearing the stories at the Zondo Commission about what people did. That was all, if it wasn't for people like Amal Bugani, for example, and the great work that they did, we wouldn't know that. We would have been oblivious to it. So I think, yes, we're painting a picture against audit firms. We should also be having a go at management, private and public alike, and hold them accountable.
So you did ask a question about audit quality. I know that ERBA are busy with a lot of work on audit quality. And I think there will be significant changes in the next year of how audit quality is going to be assessed and who's held accountable for audit quality within the firms. So there's a change, and I think it's good. There's significant more negotiation around how to assess the quality. So there will be changes coming. I can't discuss it at the moment. I think the audit quality is okay. I do have an issue that we want to hold audit firms accountable. for everything that goes wrong. And if you're looking at materiality, it's impossible for them to pick up in volume-wise, the types of things that are happening. That's management's job. That's the leadership's job, to put those structures and those governance structures in place. And very often we sit and we talk and we say, the financials look like this, and this is the organization. That's got nothing to do with the organization. That's the end result. If I go to an organization and that organization's governance structures, the management structures are working, the accountability within the organization is working, and the operations of the organization is working, what sort of audit report am I going to get on the financials? That should be the easiest amount of work in the world. I had a friend who was a CA. He said they worked for a firm which was a German production firm in South Africa. He says in all the years of his articles at that place that he had, the only finding they ever had in the 1 year was an invoice was filed out of place. That's all they could give a comment on. He says when they walked in for the audit, the finance people used to put their feet on the desk and say, we've got 2 weeks off. All right, that speaks to the quality of the operation. All right, do we need to fix the quality of our operation? In South Africa, yes. Do we need to do a job because it's a job? Or because it pays me some money? No.
Okay.
There was a movie I saw one day about a lady who was cleaning, who was a cleaner in a airport, and she did that job with the best of her ability, and she was proud of what she did. So if I were to ask my staff, are you proud of what you've done today? And they say to me, no, then I don't want that person in my organization. Because irrespective of what we're doing, we should be proud of what we've achieved in a day. Irrespective of the job that we do. Irrespective of the job. Because that speaks to, I want to serve everybody. And that speaks to Ubuntu.
And on that bombshell, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for listening to us. And safe travels. Just don't break the speed limit.